Jamey's done 500 drafts as we record on July 29th. Who are the players that he keeps drafting over and over? Find out right now on FFT Express. Okay, who's a headliner for you? Because you are doing a ton of drafts, and I love that. Like 7 days of a week, how many of them do you have a draft?
I'll give you an example, and she's probably can hear me doing this. So my wife and I, our two oldest kids were coming back from sleepaway camp, and we got somebody to babysit the 6-year-old, and so no kids in the house. We went out to dinner, and nothing to worry about, no responsibilities. And she's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing a best ball draft." It was a quick underdog 20-second per pick draft. She's like, "Really?"
It's good to see the romance is still there, Jamey. But,
Yes.
like, give me a player that you find yourself drafting all the time.
I said this before. Kyler Murray is probably the quarterback I have the most exposure to right now, just based on where you can draft him, what his upside is. I hope it doesn't change. And I think your scoring system matters, because 6 points versus 4 points, he goes a little bit sooner in 4 points. You see him typically in 4-point per passing touchdown leagues. He goes ahead of Stroud and ahead of Burrow, which, again, makes sense just based on what he's potentially going to do. But in 6 points, he goes behind those guys, and I think he has just as much upside as them. So Kyler Murray is my the quarterback I have the most exposure to.
If you miss out on him, then who do you see yourself getting a lot of?
So again, it depends on the format that you're in. If I miss out on him, then I can still pivot to mostly in 6 points for passing touchdowns. The guys that I'll pivot to are Dak or Jordan Love. You get past those guys, then I usually try to do a combination of Brock Purdy, Tua, Jared Goff, and Jane Daniels. I usually take Daniels first, just because, again, I favor the rushing upside. That's in 6 points for passing touchdown leagues. But any of those combination of Goff, Tua, Purdy, Trevor Lawrence, those type of guys.
Okay. How about some running backs that you find yourself drafting over and over?
The high end variety is typically James Cook, Isaiah Pacheco, Rashad White, that group. I take a lot of one of those guys. I was doing this before the news, so I don't know if I'll be able to still do it now based on cost. But Chase Brown, I have a lot of exposure to Chase Brown, and if he hits, I'll be fairly pleased with how that result goes, because in a lot of cases he's like my fourth running back. But Chase Brown, I have a lot of exposure to him. Brian Robinson is somebody that I draft a lot of, because I think he'll be the better of the two Washington running backs. And then on the lower end of it, a lot of Jaleel McLaughlin and a lot of Rico Dowdle. Those are guys you can get very cheap and may end up being the best running backs on their backfield. Who knows how successful they'll be, because I think Dallas's backfield is going to be muddy and bad offensive line, or a struggling offensive line. And Denver, could be 4 guys that they're splitting touches with. But those are 2 guys that I typically take a little bit later.
Yeah, I get a lot of Kamara, but it's really got to be. Earliest I drafted Kamara was last week. I drafted him. I had the 9th overall pick.
Round
so
4.
The 4th pick of round 4. So that's 40th overall. That's the earliest that, I'd want to take Kamara. I'd love to get him. Look, it's a 4th round pick, but 4th or 5th round pick for Kamara. I do have a lot of him. I don't know if I've really been in the James Cook, Pacheco world that much, but those are 2 good young running backs I wouldn't mind getting. It's just a matter. I don't know. Like if I take Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson in round 1, it's pretty unlikely I'm going to end up with James Cook or Isaiah Pacheco or Rashad White, because I'm going receiver there. But Moss had been a guy, Jamey, that I was taking so much of, and probably need to dial that back. What's your take on that Bengals situation right now?
I think we're going to see them split touches. I've kind of always been in the camp of I want to see Moss do it over a full season, because going back to Dave did a great job with this when he was in Buffalo. Outlining his injury track record at Utah, that sort of played itself out in Buffalo a little bit as well. We had a hard time staying healthy for stretches. He would end up looking good, and then Devin Singletary would take the job from him. And Heath brought up the Alexander Madison reference, and I know what he was getting at on our full length show on Monday, of small sample size of him being the guy and at that level. And he was amazing last year in that 4 or 5 game stretch for the Colts. But, can he do that over a full season? So Chase Brown, Zach Taylor said, which I think raised a few eyebrows, Chase Brown with Zach Moss was, when he was asked about Brown, and it, sort of was like, well, isn't it like Brown with Moss? Because I think that's kind of how
Right.
we all viewed it, was that Moss was coming in as the guy. Well, Chase Brown apparently is having a great camp. He's running with the ones. Will he be the 3 down back? Will it be, pass protection, because Moss seems to do a better job at that? There's a lot at play here, but I think just right now, I said it, the 3 backfields that feel like, you kind of just mixing and matching or taking the latter of the two. Pittsburgh with Warren and Najee, Tennessee with Spears and with Pollard, and I'm saying the second guy specifically on purpose, and Cincinnati with Brown and Moss. Like, you're just waiting for the second guy to come, because the second guy may end up being better than the first guy.
Comment here. Moss, likely the goal line guy, comment in our chat.
And you brought that up.
Yeah, I don't know. I brought that up that Chase Brown did not have he only had 44 carries last year, but he didn't have a single carry on 3rd or 4th and 1. Zach Moss, even though Zach Moss was a part-time player, he had among the most 3rd and 4th and 1 carries last year, and he was pretty good with them. But yeah, that's something that we don't know. I think Moss, you just look at them, you would think he's more suited for that role, but that could be what ends up determining who's the better bet there. We got to take a break here. We'll talk about some wide receivers and tight ends that Jamey keeps drafting after this on Fantasy Football Today Express. All right, what do you got, Jamey? Wide receivers.
So a lot of guys that I end up drafting so far, not necessarily of the first couple rounds, because that's easy. George Pickens I have a lot of exposure to him. Christian Watson, a lot of exposure to him. Jameson Williams, a lot of exposure to them. And you kind of see the profile that I'm looking at here. Big play, explosive type of guys. Clearly, there's different varieties here, because Pickens should be a more targeted player than Watson, but Watson can end up being the best receiver for the Packers, and Jameson Williams could be a very high explosive type of player for the Lions in more ways than one. If he blows up and doesn't perform well, then he'll be off my fantasy roster. But these are receivers that I think are in good situations. Good offenses in terms of Jameson and Watson, but just great opportunity for Pickens. So based on where you're able to draft them, Pickens a lot of times my 3rd receiver. I would consider him a number 2 receiver. Watson is usually my 3rd or my 4th, or usually my 4th, because I go receiver early, but flex, in a 3 receiver league. And then Jameson is just the type of guy that I like to have on my bench. That if he does hit, you just have a great opportunity to, hopefully use him on a week-to-week basis. But those are 3 guys that I have a lot of exposure to.
All right, and let's get to tight ends now. Who are some tight ends you see yourself drafting a lot?
Yeah, so I don't always look at the top 4 guys, because the ADP sometimes gets a little bit too rich, and I'm kind of talking out both sides of my mouth, because I think the Kincaid ADP is probably rising a little bit too high. But Kincaid is usually, I see the first 4 guys go. I have a lot of exposure to Kincaid, because I think he's going to have a similar type of season with upside comparatively to, let's say, Trey McBride and Mark Andrews. Those are my 3, 4, and 5 tight ends. I think the other 2 guys are a little bit different if they hit, in terms of Laporta and Kelsey. But Kincaid could easily be the number 1, receiving option for Josh Allen and the Bills. And so I draft a lot of him. If I miss on him, I will usually take a chance on Kittle or Ingram. But I usually end up skipping that range of tight ends and just waiting for Ferguson, because I think, based on what he was able to accomplish last year, still being second on the team in targets, as you bring up all the time, it's going to happen. He's going to have a lot of 3 touchdown games like he did in the playoffs. But Ferguson has a chance to be a reliable threat for Dak Prescott, and I just like the situation based on the cost.
Yeah, and Ferguson is like my last line of defense at tight end. I don't really want Njoku. I don't really want Dallas Goedert. I'm intrigued by Kellen Moore, and if that would change things for Goddard,
Same.
but I don't. I know we talk about Pat Freiermuth, but I still think that's kind of a streamer. Ferguson, yeah, I've seen a lot of respect for Ferguson. The people, I think, understand you're not going to lose at tight end if you have Jake Ferguson. You may not win, but there's a nice safety.
You should be looking at 10 PPR points per game, and that's, I think,
More.
realistic. Huh?
I hope more.
No. I hope more as well, but I think that's kind of what you're looking for. You're not going to get crushed consistently from him.
10.4 last year. Better, worse, or the same?
I think better.
Right. I almost feel like when we talk about him, we don't even consider the possibility that he could do better. But he could do better.
Well, I think for me at least, it's Jason Witten, Dalton Schultz, Jake Ferguson. You have a pretty consistent track record here of what the tight end has been in this offense. Different coordinators, but same quarterback. Dak Prescott has leaned on his tight ends. 3 of the last, I think, 3 years in a row. Tight end has been second on the team in targets. So you're talking about 100 targets. Can he get to 120? I don't think that's crazy. So Yeah, he's a very good fallback option. So for me, it's we talked about the Kittle, Pitts, Ingram group. I think that's how the ADP goes.
Yes.
After that, for me, I have it ranked 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 of Ferguson at 9, Goddard at 10, Njoku at 11, Freiermuth 12, and Bowers 13. I don't have any problem waiting for any of those guys, but there's a sliding scale, as you can tell.
All right. That's Jamey. I'm Adam. Have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you tomorrow on Fantasy Football Today Express.